I'm Diana Thompson, 32 years old, and last spring I sat across from my parents as they told me I would be paying for everything: my sister's debt, their retirement, even the mistakes I didn't know existed. They said it like it was already decided, like it wasn't a conversation at all, just an announcement. I remember my hand tightening around the iced tea glass Mom had made with mint from the garden, like it was some sort of peace offering, while Dad leaned back in his chair like we were discussing the weather. Not my life savings. And Amanda just smiled at me like she already knew I'd say yes, but the part that still plays in my head is how quiet Uncle Peter was the whole time, watching me like he already knew what I would do next before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to choose yourself in a room full of people who never have, I grew up in a red brick colonial in a quiet neighborhood outside Lexington, Massachusetts. One of those places where the houses are close together and the yards are tidy, and every kid walks to school with a backpack too big for their shoulders. My dad worked long hours at the post office, and Mom taught second grade at the elementary school around the corner. On the outside, we were steady, predictable, the kind of family that smiled for Christmas cards and waved at the mailman. But inside that house, the rules were different for each of us. I was their first daughter, which meant I got the full weight of every expectation. Curfews, chores, perfect grades. Responsibility was the language they raised me in, and I learned it well. When I brought home an A-, Dad would put the paper down slowly and ask what went wrong. When I forgot to take the trash out on a Thursday, I'd lose weekend privileges. Amanda came 5 years later, and with her, the rule book vanished. She got comfort, where I got correction, praise where I got silence. If her grades slipped, Mom would say, at least she tried when she forgot a chore. I'd do it for her because Diana doesn't mind helping. She's better at it anyway, and if I protested, I was called unkind. The older we got, the clearer the pattern became when I needed money to register for the SAT. Dad told me to pick up more babysitting shifts that same month. They surprised Amanda with a brand new bike for no reason. When it came time for college, I applied for every scholarship I could find, waited tables, and took out loans just to make it through. I graduated on time with a marketing degree and debt that followed me well into adulthood. Amanda's path looked different. They paid for her applications without blinking, bought her a MacBook, and covered tuition for 3 different schools. She dropped out of all of them over 5 years. Each time they said, maybe this one just wasn't the right fit. I never said much. I had my own apartment in Somerville, shared with roommates and secondhand furniture. I worked my way from assistant to specialist and finally to manager. I ate a lot of noodles in those first years and skipped vacations so I could build my emergency fund, brick by 32. I had almost $65,000 in savings and $12,000 left on my student loans. Then last February, I got promoted to senior marketing manager. My first 6-figure salary, more responsibility, more pressure, but also more possibility. I didn't tell my family right away. I wanted to enjoy it before it became about someone else. But the news traveled anyway. 3 days after the promotion, Mom called, sounding more cheerful than I'd heard in years. She asked about my new title, the raise, the office I'd be working from. I should have known something was coming. The text came that Wednesday. Diana, we need to have a family meeting this Saturday at 5. It's important. Everyone will be there. Dad and I are making dinner. Please come. I read it 3 times. Family meetings didn't happen in our house unless something was wrong. I spent the next 2 days wondering if Dad's heart was acting up again, or if Mom had gotten bad news from the doctor when I pulled into their driveway Saturday afternoon. Uncle Peter's SUV was already there, and Amanda's blue car was tucked by the garage. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there smiling, like nothing was out of place. "Diana, you're here, come in, she said, and the way she said it made my stomach sink. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic. Mom had made pot roast, the one she usually saved for holidays. Amanda smiled too brightly when she handed me a plate. Dad avoided eye contact and kept clearing his throat like he was about to speak, but couldn't quite start. Uncle Peter nodded politely when I looked over at him, but didn't say much beyond hello. The new leather sofa caught my eye as I sat down. The old fabric one we'd grown up with was gone, replaced by something sleek and expensive. A flat screen stretched across the living room wall, bigger than anything they'd ever owned before. Mom and Dad had always been careful about spending, at least that's what they told me whenever I asked for anything as a kid. It felt out of place. Dinner was quiet except for Dad talking about his golf game and Amanda asking about my promotion in a way that felt rehearsed. "So, senior manager now," she said, passing the roles. "What kind of raise comes with that?" She smiled, but her eyes darted toward Mom. "Amanda." Mom interrupted, smoothing her napkin. "We're not talking business at dinner." Then she offered me more potatoes like that would smooth over the awkward moment. We moved to the living room after dessert. Mom brought out tiramisu, which she'd never made before. Dad waited until we'd all sat down, then cleared his throat again. "We have some family matters to discuss," he said, like he was reading from a script. I sat on the armchair. Amanda and Mom took the new couch. Uncle Peter pulled a dining chair close, but not too close like he wasn't really part of it. I was facing all of them. Dad looked at Mom. She nodded. Then he looked at me. "Your sister's had a rough year," he began. "Financial setbacks." Amanda sniffled. Mom patted her arm. "She tried starting a business," Dad continued. "Online boutique. You remember the jewelry and scarves she talked about?" I nodded. I remembered. It had lasted about 2 months before the posts stopped showing up on her page. "She put quite a bit into it," he said. "Inventory website, rented a little office in Cambridge." Amanda jumped in. "My apartment wasn't professional enough for vendor meetings." Mom added quickly. "She was doing everything she could to make it work. She really tried." Her voice caught like she was about to cry. I stayed quiet, waiting. There was more. I could feel it. There were also some other expenses, Dad said, glancing at Amanda. She looked down at her hands. Credit cards, loans, some medical bills from when she didn't have insurance. It added up. I looked at them, unsure what they were really asking me. "She's in debt," Mom said softly. "Serious debt." "How much?" I asked. Dad hesitated. 78,000. I blinked. 78. Amanda started listing it out. 3 credit cards, about 24 total. A small business loan. A personal loan to consolidate things, but then I had to take out more. Back rent, some medical stuff, and I borrowed from a few friends. The number echoed in my head. 78,000. It was more than I'd made in a year until just recently. It was nearly everything I had saved. Mom leaned forward. "She's been so overwhelmed. She's not sleeping. The stress is hurting her health." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but I still don't understand what this meeting is about." Dad looked at Mom. Amanda spoke first. "We thought, since you just got promoted, maybe you could help. Just until I get back on my feet." Dad added, "We've already helped her twice in the last couple of years. We've used up a good portion of our retirement savings." Mom nodded. "We just can't do more. We're getting older. We don't have time to rebuild all that." Then she looked at me, eyes soft and persuasive. "But you, Diana, you're in such a good place now. Your new salary—" "My new salary is from years of hard work," I said. "Of course," Dad replied, "but family helps family." Amanda leaned forward. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't know what else to do. I can't even get approved for a studio without a co-signer. So what exactly are you asking?" I asked, though I already knew. Dad didn't hesitate. "We'd like you to pay off Amanda's debt, all of it. It would be a fresh start for her," Mom said quickly, "a chance to rebuild." I stared at them. "You want me to give Amanda $78,000. That's almost everything I've saved." "It's not giving," Amanda said. "It's more like a loan. I'll pay you back. Eventually." "Eventually I'm applying for jobs," she said. "Some good leads." Before I could respond, Dad added, "And we wanted to bring up something else. Your mother and I, our retirement fund isn't where it should be anymore. After helping Amanda. We were hoping," Mom said, "you could contribute. Not a lot. Maybe $1,000 a month, just until things are back to normal." I looked at them all, not sure what to say. They were asking for more than $100,000. Just like that. Amanda reached out, her voice eager. "Say yes, Dee. Please, I'm drowning." I looked at Uncle Peter. He hadn't spoken at all. Finally, he said, "Maybe Diana needs some time to think about it. Mom snapped, Peter, we discussed this. Diana knows this is the right thing to do." I stood up. "I need a minute." I left the room. No one followed. Upstairs, I found myself in my old room. It was now a home office, but the bones were still there. My debate trophies, a photo from high school, the desk where I filled out college applications late at night. I sat on the futon, my hands shaking. I thought about the year Amanda got a trip to Florida fully paid for by our parents while I was working 2 jobs with bronchitis. I remembered when I asked for help with college application fees, and Dad told me to plan better. I remembered the time they borrowed money for a roof repair and never paid it back. The time Amanda wanted money for a trip to Spain, and I said no, and Mom called me selfish. It all came rushing back. If I said yes tonight, it wouldn't end here. Downstairs, the voices were muffled. My heart was racing. But somewhere underneath all that noise, something steady had started to form. The hallway light was still on when I came back down. No one had moved. Mom's hands were folded in her lap. Dad sat stiffly in his recliner as if the upholstery itself held him there. Amanda looked up hopeful. Uncle Peter just gave me a quiet nod like he'd been waiting to see which way the wind would turn. I sat down again, smoothed the hem of my blouse, and took a breath. "I've thought about it," I said, "and I can't do what you're asking." For a moment, no one said a word. The quiet was thick. Mom was the first to react. She set down her coffee cup, the clink louder than it should have been. "What do you mean you can't? Of course you can. You just don't want to. I'm not in a position to pay off Amanda's debts," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I can't commit to monthly payments for your retirement." Dad leaned forward. "You just got promoted. You're making 6 figures now. My new salary doesn't change the years of saving it took to get where I am," I replied. "I've made plans based on careful budgeting. I didn't account for an extra $100,000 in family needs." Amanda's jaw dropped. "You're seriously going to let me drown like this? I'm sorry you're struggling," I said. "But these are consequences of choices you made." Mom's tone rose. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat your family." I let the words sit in the space between us before I answered. "You raised me. You provided food and a roof. But college I paid my own way. I worked 2 jobs. I took out loans. I've earned everything I have." "That's not fair," Dad said. "We helped where we could. Did you—" I looked at them one at a time. When I asked for help with college application fees, I was told to figure it out. "But Amanda got a birthday car. When I came home sick from school jobs, you said I should be more resilient. But Amanda got a paid vacation to Florida." Amanda's voice cracked. "This is different. I'm in real trouble. You're just being cruel." "I'm not refusing to help completely," I said. "I'll help you find a credit counselor. I can sit with you and help create a budget. I'll even look over your resume if you need help applying for jobs." Amanda crossed her arms. "That's not helpful. I need money, not lectures." I turned to Dad. "This isn't a family obligation. It's a demand. I didn't sign up for this." "You're being selfish," Mom snapped. "Completely selfish." "It's not selfish to protect what I've worked for," I said, still calm. "It's responsible." Uncle Peter finally spoke. "Maybe we should take a step back." But Mom cut him off. "Stay out of this, Peter. This is between us and our daughters." Amanda's tone shifted again. "Okay. What about half or just $20,000 to get the worst cards off my back?" "That's not going to fix the issue," I said. "If we don't address what led to the debt, we'll be right back here." Dad stood up now, frustration in every step. "We raised you to care about your family." "Where is that girl?" "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "That's exactly what I'm doing." Mom's voice cracked. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." Dad muttered, "You said she'd agree once we explained it." I turned to Amanda. "You told them I'd say yes." She looked away. "I just said you'd probably help, that's all." Then I looked at Uncle Peter. "Why are you here tonight?" He shifted in his chair. "They asked me to be here for support. Support for what I asked." No one answered. "To help convince me." Silence. Then Dad said it out loud. "We already told Amanda you'd handle it." I felt the words settle over me like a final stone. She'll pay everything he'd said. They weren't asking. They had decided. I stood up slowly. This wasn't a discussion. It was a plan. You all just expected me to fall in line. Mom looked stunned. Amanda stood up. "You can't walk away. I haven't agreed to anything I said, and I'm not going to." "You'll regret this," Mom warned. "You walk out now, and you're turning your back on this family." I picked up my coat. "I've helped with house repairs. I've driven you to appointments. I've been there when it mattered. But this is not help. This is exploitation." Dad raised his voice. "After all we've done," I paused at the front door. "If you ever want to rebuild this family in a way that respects boundaries, I'm open to it. But I won't be used. Not anymore." Amanda's voice was shaking. "I already promised the creditors. I told them I'd have money next week. That was never yours to promise," I said, opening the door. Behind me, the room filled with voices again. Mom calling my name. Amanda crying. Dad demanding I come back. Uncle Peter didn't say anything. I stepped outside and closed the door. The cool air hit me like water. I walked to my car, slowly waiting for the guilt to catch up. It didn't. Instead, I felt something lighter. Something I hadn't felt in years. I started the engine and drove away. The next morning, the first message came from my mother. "Your behavior last night was unacceptable. We raised you better than this." Then one from my father. "Your sister is in crisis. You were her last hope. Family supports each other." And finally, Amanda. "Thanks for nothing. My phone won't stop ringing with debt collectors. Must be nice to sit in your fancy apartment while my life falls apart." I didn't reply to any of them. Not yet. I needed quiet. I went to work that Monday like I always did. Logged into my team's planning meeting, answered emails, reviewed the numbers for our campaign rollout. Outwardly, everything looked normal. But something had shifted. A hum under my skin. A feeling that something large had finally snapped. By Wednesday, the calls started. Not from my parents, but from extended family. Aunt Patricia wanted to know if the misunderstanding had been cleared up. My cousin Sarah said she hoped I was okay after the disagreement. Uncle Robert left a voicemail that began with, "I'm not taking sides," then gently pushed me to reconsider. It didn't take long to realize my parents had spread the story, their version of it. One where I was the cold, high-earning daughter who turned her back on family during a hard time. The old narrative repackaged and passed along the phone tree. Each conversation started with concern, but they all drifted to the same conclusion. Maybe I could offer a compromise. Maybe I could give Amanda a little something, just to show I cared. Evenings became my sanctuary. I turned off my phone when I came home, made tea, watched old travel documentaries, and let the silence settle around me like a coat I hadn't worn in years. It was unfamiliar, but it fit. Friday night, Rachel came over. We ordered Thai food and split a bottle of wine. I told her everything, the dinner, the debt, the retirement plan. The silence that followed. She listened until I was done, then leaned back on the couch. "So, they told you what you'd be doing with your money, didn't even ask, and now they're shocked you didn't say yes." Her voice was calm, but hearing it said aloud like that made me laugh for the first time in days. "That's it exactly," I said. "They thought I'd just agree. You did the right thing," she said. "If you'd given in, what would have come next? Another loan." "A bigger ask." I nodded. I think I knew that. But sitting in that house, it felt like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The following Tuesday, I was in the office break room finishing a call from my mother that had quickly turned into another guilt trip. When I hung up, Marcus from HR gave me a small smile. "Tough day," I nodded. "Family stuff." He hesitated, then said, "My brother used to do that. Borrowed money for years, promised to pay it back. He never did. It wasn't until I stopped helping that he figured things out. It wasn't advice, just a story. But it helped more than he probably realized." 3 weeks after that night, I started seeing Dr. Lewis, a therapist a coworker recommended. I told her the whole story in our first session, start to finish. When I was done, she said something that stuck. "What you're describing has elements of financial abuse. It's not always intentional. But the result is that one person's resources are treated like they belong to everyone else." I sat with that for a while. Over the next few sessions, we talked about what that looked like. How some families build quiet patterns. One person is expected to rescue, to absorb the stress, to always say yes. And when they don't, they become the problem. Dr. Lewis helped me name what I was feeling. Guilt, grief, and something else, relief. Amanda kept texting. Her messages moved in circles. One day she'd beg, The next, she'd accuse. Then she'd apologize. Then blame me again. Some of them came hours apart. Some were long paragraphs. Some were just one word. Please. My parents, too, shifted tactics. From disappointment to silence. Then back to disappointment again. 5 weeks in, I got the message I'd been expecting. If you can't support this family in its time of need, we'll need to reevaluate our relationship going forward. The quiet that followed was sharp and final. They stopped calling. No more texts, no more guilt, just silence. At first it hurt more than I expected. I kept checking my phone anyway, even knowing nothing was coming. But after a while, the silence became something else. Not punishment, just space. 3 months passed. Mom started sending short messages now and then, updates about the neighbors, a cousin's baby shower, never mentioning Amanda, never mentioning money. Amanda's messages came less often, too. When they did, they were clipped. Hope you're doing well, or still job hunting. I still saw Dr. Lewis. And at her suggestion, I joined a support group for adults navigating complex family roles. Every week, we sat in a circle. Some people had siblings who expected bailouts. Others had parents who refused to respect boundaries. One woman, Clara, talked about funding her brother's 5th business before finally walking away. Another, Michael, said he'd once been asked to pay for his parents' mortgage because he had the steady job. I listened. I nodded. And slowly I started to breathe easier. The guilt didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. By spring, I started spending weekends hiking again. I signed up for a photography class I'd put off for years. I cleaned out my hall closet and donated 3 bags of clothes I hadn't touched in a decade. Work felt different too. Lighter. I had energy for my team, for ideas, for the kind of work that made me proud. In May, I met someone. His name was Benjamin. He was a landscape architect with a calm voice and kind eyes. We met through the hiking group, started slow, a coffee after the trail, then dinner, then Sunday afternoons at the Arboretum. I told him about my family one night over roasted chicken and red wine. He didn't flinch. Families are complicated, he said. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means you finally love yourself too. That night I wrote a note in my journal. I didn't lose them. I lost the version of myself they depended on. And maybe that was necessary. 5 weeks after the meeting, I came home to a long envelope wedged in my mailbox. Inside was a typed letter from my parents. We hope you've taken this time to reflect. But if you continue refusing to support the family in a meaningful way, we will need to reevaluate our relationship going forward. Family means being there when it's inconvenient, not just when it's easy. I sat on the edge of my bed rereading it once, then again. No greeting, no sign-off, just that. That evening, I showed the letter to Dr. Lewis. She read it silently, then looked up and said, "They've raised the stakes." I thought the silence was their final word, I said. "They're hoping this will bring you back into the pattern," she said. "It's what people do when old tools stop working." The next day, I wrote my response. A short note. No anger, just clarity. I love you all. I remain open to rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. My boundaries around financial support are firm. I hope we can find a way forward that honors everyone's autonomy and responsibility. I mailed it. Then I waited. Days passed. Then weeks. No reply. It felt like I had stepped off a moving train, only to discover the ground beneath me was solid. With the pressure gone, I began to reclaim small things. I bought myself a new set of kitchen knives I'd been putting off for years. I organized the hall closet, giving away 3 winter coats I hadn't worn since my 20s. I moved my emergency fund into a high-yield account. Amanda's messages came less often now. They were still erratic. One would say, "I'm trying the next. I can't believe you did this to me." I didn't answer most of them. When I did, I kept it short. "I hope things are moving in a better direction. I'm still willing to help you build a repayment plan or apply for work." The first month was the hardest. I'd wake up at 3:00 a.m. with doubt creeping in. I'd replay their voices in my head. Dad's disappointment, Mom's accusations, Amanda's pleas. I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I should have offered some small amount, just to keep the peace. Dr. Lewis gave me language for that. "Healthy guilt tells you when you violated your own values," she said. "Unhealthy guilt tells you to violate them for someone else's comfort." I wrote that one down. By the second month, I was sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking my phone during lunch breaks. I started walking the long way home from the train station. Dr. Lewis encouraged me to track what had changed, not just in them, but in me. I noticed I was more focused at work. I spoke up more during meetings. I started mentoring a junior team member who reminded me of myself when I first started quiet, but sharp, always prepared. One Saturday afternoon, I met Rachel for coffee. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You look lighter." I told her about the letter, the silence, the nights I still wondered if I'd done the right thing. "You didn't just walk away," she said. "You walked toward yourself." In the third month, I joined a small weekend hiking group that met outside the city. That's where I met Benjamin. He was quiet at first, observant, wore hiking boots that looked like they'd actually been used. He worked in landscape architecture, and when he talked about his projects, his hands moved in slow, deliberate shapes. The third week, he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee after the trail. It was simple, comfortable, and easy in a way I hadn't expected. He didn't ask much about my family at first. When I eventually told him, he nodded slowly. "I've seen that before," he said. "Families that blur love and obligation until you can't tell the difference." We talked about boundaries, about learning how to say no without apology. "Does it get easier?" I asked. "Not right away," he said. "But then one day you look around and realize you're not walking on eggshells anymore." That stayed with me. In our fourth session that month, Dr. Lewis asked me what I wanted to do next. "Keep going," I said. Toward the end of April, I received a message from Amanda. It was the most level one I'd seen from her in months. "I'm working with a credit counselor. They've helped me consolidate some of the debt. I got a job at an insurance office. It's entry-level, but it's something. Just thought you should know." I read it twice before responding. "That's good news. I hope the new structure gives you some breathing room. Let me know if you want help with budgeting." She wrote back a few hours later. "Thanks. Maybe." I took a walk that night, the air just starting to warm, the city shaking off the last of winter. I passed a flower stand and bought a small bunch of tulips for my kitchen table. I realized I wasn't waiting anymore for their call, for their apology, for anything to go back to how it used to be. I was living in what came after. By early summer, my world had taken on a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Mornings started with real breakfasts, eggs toast, the radio playing softly while I sipped coffee without checking my phone. I was no longer waiting for something to drop. One evening in June, Benjamin and I hiked through the conservation land just north of the city. The trail was quiet, shaded with birdsong cutting through the stillness. At the top of a ridge, he paused to take a drink and looked at me. "You've changed since I met you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "For better or worse?" He smiled. "Lighter. Like you're not carrying something anymore." I didn't answer right away. We sat on a bench that overlooked the hills. The light was soft, streaking through the trees. "You know," I said, "it's strange. I thought saying no would close everything. But what it really did was make space for something new. That weekend, I got a text from my mother. 'Your father and I would like to have dinner with you next weekend, just to talk.' I read it twice. Then I called Dr. Lewis. We talked through the possibilities, what it might mean, what I wanted it to mean. 'If you go,' she said, 'decide in advance where your boundaries are and keep the setting neutral.' I messaged back that I'd meet them at a restaurant near their house. Public comfortable 2 hours max. Amanda would not be there. My parents agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived 10 minutes early. I chose a table near the window and ordered a glass of water. They came in together, dressed neatly, both looking a little older than I remembered. We started with small talk. The weather, the neighbors. My mother asked about work, and I answered simply. My father mentioned his golf group, something about a tournament he was no longer playing in. It wasn't until the entrees arrived that my mother finally said, "We've missed you, Diana." I nodded. "I've missed you too." But I needed the space. My father looked down at his plate, then up at me. "We've done some thinking. Maybe we expected too much. Maybe we didn't see things clearly." It wasn't quite an apology, but it wasn't nothing. "She's been working with a credit counselor," my mother added. "Amanda. She consolidated some things. She's got a job now. Insurance office. It's small, but it's something." I took a breath. "How is she doing with it all?" "She's learning," my father said. "It hasn't been easy. We didn't dwell on it. The rest of dinner stayed on the surface, safe, polite. But as we walked out into the parking lot, my mother stopped and turned to me. "We're trying to understand Diana. It's not easy, but we're trying." That evening, I sat on my couch shoes off coat, still on the restaurant receipt, crumpled in my hand. I didn't feel relief exactly, but I felt still. In the weeks that followed, I began seeing them more often. Dinner once a month, a Saturday walk through the farmer's market. It wasn't like before. There were still things we didn't say, still space between us. But it wasn't sharp anymore. When money came up, I redirected the conversation. When assumptions crept back in, I paused and reset. The habits were deep, but so was my resolve. 3 months after that first dinner, Amanda reached out. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We sat outside a little cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. She wore a pressed blouse, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked tired, but clearer. "You know," she said, stirring her iced tea, "I hated you at first." I nodded. I figured. I thought you were being cold, selfish. But then I started working with this counselor, and she hesitated. I think I needed to hit bottom. I didn't speak. I let her finish. "Budgeting sucks," she said, "and watching my friends go out when I can't afford to. Even worse. But having a steady paycheck, knowing what's coming in and what's going out, it's not exciting, but it's solid. I'm glad to hear that." I said. She looked at me. "You know what's weird? I think I respect you more now than I did when you were the one always bailing us out." I smiled. "I didn't think you noticed." She shrugged. "I notice now." That afternoon she asked if I'd help her tweak her monthly budget. I pulled out a pen, and we went line by line adjusting numbers, setting aside $20 for savings. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about starting over with knowledge, not cash. That night I walked home slowly, a grocery bag in one hand, a quietness in my chest that didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. 1 year after the family meeting, I found myself on a trail just west of the city, hiking beside Benjamin. The path curved through a ridge that opened up to a view of the skyline, softened by haze and distance. We stopped at a wooden overlook. He leaned on the railing, arms folded. "You've been quiet," he said. I nodded, watching the breeze lift the edges of my jacket, just thinking. About them, I hesitated. Then I said, "About how far I've come. About what it took to get here." We didn't say anything for a while. Below us, a hawk coasted over the trees, moving with effortless control. The kind that comes from learning where the currents are and where they aren't. That night, I called my parents. We hadn't spoken on the phone in months. Our conversations had stayed surface level, in-person visits, polite exchanges. But I wanted something more honest this time. My mother answered. "Diana, hi," I said. "Do you have a minute to talk?" She paused. "Yes, of course." I took a breath. "I just wanted to say that I love you, and that I know this past year has been hard, for all of us." She was quiet. "I also need you to know that my boundaries haven't changed," I said. "Not because I don't care, but because I've seen what happens when I let them slide." My father came on the line a moment later. His voice was slower, a little rough. "We understand more now than we did then." "I appreciate that," I said. "We may not get everything right," he said, "but we are trying." That simple sentence meant more than I expected. Over the next few months, we rebuilt slowly. I still didn't take on their financial problems, but I listened when they wanted to talk. I shared pieces of my life, and I asked about theirs. We stayed in our own homes, but we started meeting in the middle. Amanda and I met again for lunch one Saturday. She had just gotten her first performance review at work. It was solid, meets expectations across the board, with a few areas marked for growth. "I know it doesn't sound like much," she said, stirring her iced tea, "but I've never had a job long enough to even get reviewed." "It sounds like progress to me," I said. She glanced at her phone. "I've got to watch every dollar still. Can't afford to slip, but it feels good knowing I'm standing on something real." We walked back to my apartment afterward. She asked if I still had that old spreadsheet I'd used for planning my condo down payment. I opened my laptop and pulled it up. Her eyes scanned the tabs. "You tracked all of this yourself?" I nodded. "Every month. For years." She was quiet. Then she said, "You know, when you said no last year, I thought you were abandoning me. "I know," I said gently, "but now I think you were the first person who ever expected me to figure things out on my own." I didn't answer right away. I let her sit with that. Later that evening, she lingered at the door. "Thanks for not changing your mind," she said, "even when I hated you for it." That night, I sat at my desk and updated a few files. My retirement projections, my emergency fund. A new line for something I hadn't made room for in a long time, peace of mind. At work, things were steady. I'd stepped into a new mentorship program and started helping younger staff prepare for promotion reviews. It reminded me of all the times I'd had to figure it out alone and how different it felt to guide someone else without carrying them. Rachel and I still met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to walk and talk. On one of those walks, she asked, "Do you ever think they'll go back to how they used to be?" "I think patterns don't break easily," I said, "but I also think they've seen I'm not the same person." And Amanda. She's starting to understand that survival doesn't come from rescue. It comes from learning how to paddle your own boat. Rachel smiled, "And you finally climbed out of theirs." That Sunday, I spent the afternoon cleaning out an old storage bin. At the bottom was a folder labeled First Apartment, a faded lease agreement, utility spreadsheets, a checklist I'd made of every dollar spent on groceries that first month. I read it once, then tucked it back inside and sealed the box. Not because I needed to forget, but because I didn't need it to explain anything anymore. A year and a half after that family meeting, life had settled into a quieter, steadier rhythm. My days felt full, but not heavy work walks with Benjamin dinners with friends and phone calls that were no longer weighed down by dread. Every so often, Mom would call to ask about a recipe or share some neighborhood news. Dad would send a photo from the backyard, usually of a stubborn raccoon or the dog asleep in the garden. There was a gentleness to our conversations now, as if we all understood that respect was the only way forward. Amanda and I saw each other every few weeks. She still watched her budget closely and sometimes grumbled about it, but there was a new kind of pride in the way she managed her life. She talked about plans saving for a reliable used car, maybe taking a community college course in accounting next fall. Sometimes she would ask my advice, and sometimes she wouldn't. It was a shift I'd never thought possible in those early days, when every conversation felt like a battle. One Sunday, Amanda and I sat on a park bench sharing coffee as the trees overhead began to turn gold. "You know," she said, "I never understood what boundaries were until you set them. I thought it meant shutting someone out. Now I see it's just making sure you don't lose yourself." She paused, looking out at the path. "I think that's the first real thing I've learned about being an adult. There was no apology, no grand confession, just a quiet understanding, something earned by weathering the storm together and coming out the other side changed but not broken." Looking back, I realized the hardest part was never standing up for myself once. It was learning how to keep standing day after day, especially when no one else seemed to understand. It was trusting that the distance would eventually make room for a new kind of closeness, built not on obligation, but on real respect. If I could say anything to my younger self, or to anyone listening now, it would be this: you are allowed to draw a line. You are allowed to want peace, even if it means walking away from old patterns. Sometimes love looks like holding on, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go so everyone has a chance to grow, even if it's slow. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever found the courage to stand your ground or are still searching for it, know you aren't alone. I hope you'll share your own journey in the comments or reach out to someone you trust. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience and quiet strength, I'd be honored if you join me again.